Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and GameFound over the next week. And if you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is definitely the place to be. But if you want to stay even more up to date, definitely go ahead and check out Board Game Co's channel, because not only does he offer all sorts of videos from reviews to previews and everything in between, but he also releases a video at the end of each month going over the following month and letting you know of all the campaigns that we know about so far. And he just released his video for the month of October, so you can go ahead and check that out right now, and I'll have a link to his channel in the description below. But before I jump into the campaigns for this week, I do like to go over some new announcements and discoveries I just found out about, and I don't have too much to go over, but I did find one piece of news that I think you might find interesting, and that's that the Street Fighter game that was previously being developed and designed in conjunction with Blacklist Games and Kolossal Games is being completely passed over to Kolossal Games. It looks like Blacklist Games sold whatever ownership that they had in it, and it's being completely moved over to Kolossal Games. Of course, Blacklist Games did help develop it and get it to the point that it is right now, but that's where it ends, and they're not going to have any part in it moving forward. So if you did have some issues with that partnership, this might be something to put your mind at ease if you were interested in this game. And that's all I really had to cover, so let's check out the campaigns. And the first campaign we have launches on October 1st, but this one's not for a board game, so I'm not going to go into as much detail, but this one is actually for a horror RPG, and this one's called Fear of the Unknown. And this is a system that's designed to allow players to immediately jump into a mystery that has a secret for players to discover, as well as clues that will help them get there. And the real value in this one is that it allows players to just jump into a scenario without any prep work required. There is some customization and different options if you want a certain setting or theme, but if you have experience as a game master and you've ever tried to set up a mystery, you probably know exactly how much prep work goes into something like that, and this is just trying to simplify that and provide a lot of options, allowing this tested system to do that heavy lifting for you. So if that sounds like something that's interesting to you, you can go ahead and check out the campaign, and I'll have links to this one and all the others that I mentioned in this video in the description below. And launching on October 4th, we have Frozen Frontier, and this plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 120 to 180 minutes to play, and this game is all about constructing buildings, collecting resources, and settling on a newly discovered planet. But this is also a campaign that I did cover in the past, so I'll just go ahead and roll that footage for you now. And this is a game about exploring a new planet and building new buildings and developing your science and industry to gain victory points and win the game. Each turn, players can move their carrier to a new city where they can collect a multi-use project card, and then they can take one of 3 possible actions. They can either construct, collaborate, or raise funds. In order to construct, players will have to spend one of those project cards, and that will have a requirement of the type of building you can build, as well as what type of locations it can be built in. And if the player is able to fulfill both of those, then they can build that building and it gets added to their player board. Not only can this grant you victory points, but these also have special abilities that will be unlocked for that player for the rest of the game. Players can settle colonists into the different cities, but they can also use their own or their competitors' science buildings to gain resources or other valuable effects. Players can get funding in a few different ways. They can get it from their own buildings, but they can also get them by completing common contracts that are accessible to all players, and whoever is able to fulfill it first will get that funding. But they can also fulfill their own private contracts that they'll be holding in their hand that they can get throughout the game. And players will get victory points for completing these contracts, but they can also get victory points by settling colonists, controlling different cities, and by fulfilling any cards that they own that have endgame bonuses. And then at the end of 3 rounds, the player with the most victory points wins the game. Also launching on October 4th, we have ArchRavels, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 35 to 45 minutes to play, and this is a game all about knitting. And this is also a campaign that I thought was launching last week, but it got postponed until this week. So this is a campaign that I also did just cover, so just like the previous one, I'll go ahead and roll that footage for you now. And this is a knitting game where players are going to be playing as different knitters, trying to collect yarn from a shared market in order to knit different items and complete different projects for victory points. And the neat thing about this game is that each player can actually have different actions available to them depending on the character that they're playing as. But whenever you're performing an action, you have to perform a different action each turn. And some of those actions might allow you to shop to gain more yarn from the market, or other actions might allow you to craft, turn that yarn into different items. Well, there might be some other special actions that might allow you to exchange any amount of a single color of yarn to another color of yarn. After all players have performed their actions, we move into the restock phase where you're going to be redrawing cards and repopulating the market. But there isn't just yarn cards that can show up here, because there's also event cards that will be resolved immediately anytime that they're drawn. And then there can also be some special request cards, which are one-time patterns to knit. And these can gain you extra victory points, but can lose you victory points if you don't complete them by the end of the game. And it's at this point in the game that players will be able to perform some free actions by trading in items that they were able to create so far, and they'll be able to do different things like turn those items back into yarn, trade in those items to complete different projects that require them, or discard them in order to enhance their pattern knowledge, which will allow them to knit that particular item a little bit easier in the future. And the game ends when there's no more projects left to draw, and the player with the most victory points at this point wins the game. Also launching on October 4th, we have new Avernus, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 120 minutes to play. And this is a game all about building up a city during the apocalypse. And in this game, each player is going to be choosing their own asymmetrical faction with their own special abilities, but also with their own set of structure cards. But in addition to your faction and your faction's cards, each player is going to have their own building area, which is going to be represented by a grid of tiles in front of them. And players are going to start by putting out their building cards in that area face down, which is going to represent rubble that players will be able to explore. And the game plays over 7 to 10 rounds, where players will be sending out their workers to the different areas in their player area in order to flip up those rubble cards and discover the structures that are underneath. Discovering those structures will grant you different resources, but then that also grants you that structure card, which will go into your personal supply and allow you to build that structure later. And the actions that the players perform are going to be limited by the workers that they have available to them, because each of your actions will require a worker, and even digging up the different ruins might require a different amount of workers depending on the colored card that you are digging up. And to actually build one of the buildings that you've acquired, it's going to require a worker as well as the resources to go along with it. And there's going to be some base amount of these resources that you'll need just to build that building to begin with. But you can also reinforce those buildings by using more stone, which is pretty helpful in an apocalyptic world. But you can also add more glass to the buildings, which isn't going to help so much with their structure, but it does make them worth more victory points if they're able to survive the apocalyptic event, which is doomed to happen. Because as players are drawing the cards throughout the game, you're going to eventually get to the meteor card, which is going to trigger the end of the game and cause all the players' boards to get hit by an apocalyptic meteor. Some players' cities might fare better than others depending on how well they're able to build and reinforce those buildings, and then players are going to be scoring victory points based on what remains. And of course, the player with the most victory points wins, and if you want to check this one out, you can check it out on BackerKit, and I'll have a link to this campaign in the description below. Also launching on October 4th, we have Harrow County, the game of Gothic conflict. And this plays 1 to 3 players and takes about 45 to 120 minutes to play. And this is based on the comic book series with the same name. I've never read this series, but I heard that it is really good. And we are in the month of October, which is the best time to discover new horror stories. So if you are into comic books and you're looking for something a little bit scary, this might be one to check out. How does the game actually play? And I think this one's going to be really interesting. It looks like it's really well done, and also the Discord community seems to think so as well, because this one is our Discord pick of the week. And the first thing that makes this one really interesting is that this one is an asymmetric game, but also plays up to 3 players. And this isn't something that you see in too many games, where each player is going to be playing a little bit different of a puzzle, but they're all intertwined in such a way that keeps the game balanced. But what makes this one even more interesting is that this is actually just a 2-player game until you get to a certain part in the story, and then you can include a 3rd player. So also not something that you see too often in board games. But each player is going to be using their magic, monsters, and might in order to destroy the town or to save the town. And the game plays over a series of chapters. There's 5 in total, and each chapter will be its own standalone session. And as you're playing through the session, you're going to get new characters introduced, each with their own individual special abilities, as well as different bonuses and cards that players can take advantage of, and even new mechanisms that are going to change the way that you play the game a little bit from session to session. And like I said, each player is going to be playing a little bit different of a puzzle, but for the most part, players are going to be taking turns performing actions by spending action tokens. And your different actions can do all sorts of different things, like earn you resources that you can spend later to spawn, move, or strengthen your different characters out on the board, trigger special abilities, attack enemy units. And another interesting thing in this game is that the battles in this game do use a cube tower, but the cube tower is actually integrated with the box, so the box actually doubles as the cube tower. And if you want to see what that looks like, you'll definitely want to check out the campaign in the description below. But the main difference between the two main factions that you're going to be playing through the majority of the game is that the first one is able to choose their actions from a limited selection, while the other player has more actions to choose from. They're going to be drawing their action tokens from a bag, which is going to make it a little bit more inconsistent as to which actions they'll have available on their turn. And the game does seem very rich with theme, but beneath that there is an abstract strategy at play where one player is trying to stretch their storm across the map, destroying buildings along the way, and the other player is trying to connect a trail of their minions. And the actual objective that each player has can change from scenario to scenario, and the scenario that introduces the third player is going to have them controlling a witch that was previously hung and then buried underground, and I guess is sort of undead, because they're going to be able to manipulate aspects of the game from beneath the board, having some control over the plants and wildlife, and also potentially taking control of some of the other players' minions. This one sounds really interesting, and if you're already a fan of the series, I think you should be excited about this one. It looks like the game itself will hold its own, and then the theme will be a nice complement to that. Really a great marrying between the two, which is always nice to see, so if you want to see more, check out the links in the description below. Also launching on October 4th, we have Biergarten, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 20 to 30 Minuten to play. And this is a tile placement game where players are going to be drafting their starting tile, and then each turn they're going to be able to draw a tile from the supply, from the open market, or randomly from another player's hand. Also on their turn, they'll be able to play one of those cards into their Biergarten, and there's a few objectives that players will be going for in order to score points. They can either score points by connecting different shields together between the tiles in order to complete a full shield, or they can gain points by matching different colors of umbrellas to get pairs, or by completing large continuous patches of umbrellas over multiple tiles. The tiles can also feature walls along the side of the tile, which can block off different tiles from other tiles, but can also create an opportunity for even more points, because creating walled-in areas is also another way to score victory points. And players will take turns doing this, drawing more tiles into their hand and then playing one into their play area until all the tiles are used. Then they're going to tally up their score, and the player with the most victory points wins the game. Really simple game to teach and play, but of course there'll be a lot of puzzly aspects to it as you're trying to optimize all the different aspects of victory points in order to get the most possible. If that sounds good to you, I have links in the description below. Also launching on the 4th, we have We're Sinking, and this plays 3 to 6 players and takes about 45 to 90 minutes to play. And this is a game where players are going to be playing competitively as pirates on a ship under siege. And players are going to be being attacked by one of the many threats, which could be a kraken, skeleton pirates, a megalodon, or even sirens. And each of the threats will work a little bit differently and might have their own creative ways to try and sink your ship. And a neat thing about this game is that not only does it have some fantastic artwork, but it also has a collapsible ship that as it's sinking more and more into the sea, you'll be able to take parts of that ship off to emulate it sinking into the table. And although on the surface this might sound like players are working cooperatively to try and defeat these different threats, that is actually not the case. This is a competitive game and there is only one winner. So if the players do manage to take out the threat, you win if you have the largest score of treasure in your possession. But alternatively, if the ship does sink, then it's the player who has the least cards in their hand that's going to win, because they're the ones that are going to be light enough to escape on a lifeboat. But each turn, players are going to be drawing water and loot cards into play, and these are going to go under the different columns, under the respective locations on the board. And as the boat gets more and more damage, that's going to create more breaches, which is going to cause more and more water cards to be drawn out each round. In each round, players will also be able to perform one action each, and there's 4 actions that players can choose from. You can either bucket water, which will help reduce the overall water level. You can patch breaches on the ship, which will prevent more water from coming in the future, but it also allows you to repair damaged cannons, which is also an action to fire those cannons to try and inflict damage on whatever enemy you're going up against. Or you can plunder, which will allow that player to steal revealed loot cards, which can also be used to influence actions in the game as an additional action on your turn if you have loot cards in your possession already. But the thing that makes this game so interesting is that players will be able to discuss which actions that they think each of the players can take, or which actions that they plan to take themselves, and share that information with the other players. But of course, being honest is optional, and the thing that makes this really interesting is that depending on the number of players that choose an action, that can actually change the way that that action works. And of course, players won't be able to know which action the other players choose because you're going to be choosing your actions in secret and then revealing them all simultaneously. And those actions will be resolved once all those players' decisions have been revealed. And the game continues like this, with players either trying to collect as much loot as possible while trying to defeat whatever beast they're up against, or trying to keep their hand as light as possible with the hopes to abandon ship. And of course, there's always the chance that you might have a change of heart depending on how the other players are influencing the battle. A really good looking game here that looks like a lot of fun, so if this one sounds interesting to you, you can find out more in the description below. And this next campaign is also launching on the 4th, and this one's called Redwood, and it plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 45 to 60 minutes to play. And this is a campaign that I thought was launching last week, but it got postponed until this week. So I already did cover this one, and this one was my pick of the week last week, so it is an exciting one. So if you haven't seen that already, I'll roll that footage for you now. And this one is my own personal pick of the week. And there's a few reasons for that. I think this game looks like a lot of fun, but it also just innovates in a way that I've never seen done before in a board game ever. And I think it really uses this innovation to tie into the theme really well. I think it all just ties together for a really amazing package that really creates an experience that feels thematic to the game, but then also presents a lot of decisions and puts players in a position to really think about what they want to do on their turn. That can just be really rewarding when you just line everything up just right. And the theme of this one is one that I'm a huge fan of because it's all focused around nature, but more specifically, this is a game all about photography, which just on its own is not something that I've seen explored too much, so it's nice to see some exposure here. Pun intended. But the way that this game works is that there's going to be a few different layers to the photograph that you're trying to create. And the first layer is that you're going to be trying to incorporate the board in various ways. So the board is actually broken up into a few different environments. So you might want a specific environment when you're trying to create a picture. But then within each environment, there's going to be different features and forestry and animals that players are also going to want to consider when they're trying to line up their shots. And each player is going to have their own photographer miniature that they're going to be moving around out on the main board. And of course, to line up your shots, you're going to be trying to get in a specific spot so that the things that you're looking for are all lining up with respect to that perspective. And this is where one aspect of the innovation really comes into play here, because in order to move around on the board, you're going to be using these special tools, and these tools are going to hook into and then rotate on your character miniature, and you're allowed to rotate it however you like so that the end of that tool lines up with a location on the board. And then when it's somewhere that you are comfortable with, you can move your character from where it is to that point on the board. But there's a few tools here, and one thing you're not allowed to do is to try the different tools to see which one gives you the best outcome. So you're going to want to probably pick a few locations out on the board that you think you might be able to get to, and then estimate which tool will get you there the best. But of course, the different animals are not just going to stand around as you're moving around and making all sorts of noise and getting within their line of sight. So your movement can also affect where the different animals end up moving out on the board, which is something that you'll also want to consider. And once you've gotten to that location on the map that you think creates that perfect Kodak moment, you're actually going to be using another tool that represents your line of sight, depending on the types of lenses that you're using on your camera. And these tools will also hook into your character miniature, but then rather than moving your miniature, you just use them to determine where different elements of the map are located within your frame of view. You can see how this tool is used here in this image where it fans out from the character miniature. And then there's two holes in the tool, and these represent different areas that you're trying to line up features in order for them to be in the proper position in your photograph when you go to take that photo. And a really fun aspect that goes along with this is that whenever you take a photo, the game also provides different cards for the different backdrops and different tokens for all the different features and animals that might be within your shot. And you're going to be taking the ones that were in your shot and then combining them to represent your photo and bring that photo to life. But to get as much points as possible, players are going to be trying to create a panorama. This means that you're going to be attaching all those photos that you create together side by side. Whenever you create a new photo, you can decide which side you put that photo on, but you'll want to line this up so that each of the environments in your panorama are beside the same environments that they're beside on the main board. So I think you can see what makes this game so much different than a lot of games out on the market right now. Not only that, but the artwork looks incredible. And if photography is a hobby of yours, or if you've ever tried it in the past, I think this game's going to do a really amazing job emulating that feeling of trying to line up your shot in various ways and get into that position that you're trying to get to in order to try and get the perspective that you're looking for. And just for me, photography is something that I do have a lot of experience in. I'm no expert by any means. And just as I was reading through how this game plays, I could really feel those moments that I had in the past, because even in the real world, when you're thinking of, I'm going to go over there and get this shot, it doesn't always line up, or things don't always feel the way that you expected when you get there. So there always is a bit of estimation going on and rolling with the punches and trying to create the best photo with what's presented to you and trying to use the lenses that best portray that. And especially when you're taking pictures of animals or anything where you can't guarantee their cooperation, you really have to be careful with the way that you move around them, which makes it quite difficult to get to the spot you want, while also hoping that thing you want to take a picture of is still in the position that you want it to be in. Really great work here, and there are a ton of different games with themes that I love, but there is only a few games where I really think the theme is spot on with the game's design, and I think this is one of them. Just like a great photo, it's not always easy to line everything up, but I think they executed on this one really well, and I'm excited to see more, and I will definitely be checking this one out myself. And if you feel the same, I have links in the description below. Also launching on the 4th, we have Pocketbook Adventures, and this is a solo game that takes just 5 to 10 minutes to play. And this is a minimalist dungeon crawler that doesn't use any dice or cards. Instead, you're just going to be using the book and a pencil. And you're going to be exploring over 50 maps, fighting monsters and bosses, leveling up your character, and grabbing loot along the way. And the way that this game works is that you're going to be flipping through the pages of the book, and each pair of pages is either going to have a final boss or a map for you to explore. And each turn you're going to be able to move up to 4 spaces in a straight line, but if you do hit terrain, that does allow you to redirect your movement. But as part of your movement, you're going to be picking up any loot that you cross over, and each page is going to introduce its own puzzle and ideas, and it might incentivize you to do certain things in a particular order, because you do want to pass over keys before you pass over chests so that you're able to get the loot within. And of course, if you end your turn near a monster, you're going to have to fight that monster, and fighting monsters all work the same, but there is some variation between them, and they do all have their own individual special abilities that could get activated depending on how you perform. But the way that combat works in this game is that there's going to be a line above the monster that you're currently fighting, and there's going to be a little dot on that line, and that's where you're going to be putting your pencil to start the combat. Then you're going to look away from the page, lift up the pencil, and try to drop it in the center of the target below the enemy. Doing that successfully is going to allow you to deal the most damage, but if you go outside that center circle, you get a little bit more risky, because if you happen to hit these dark areas, that's going to trigger that enemy's special ability. The different maps can also have map-specific rules that make them play a little bit different from what you've experienced so far, and of course each of the bosses will also introduce their own mechanisms as well and behave a little bit differently from the other bosses and monsters that you've seen in the game. And just like in most adventures, there will be some occasional moments of respite as you are able to go into the training pages, as well as the different shops where you'll be able to spend your gold and buy some additional items that can help you in future pages. There's definitely some really cool ideas here, doing things that I haven't ever seen done before. And this is also something that's super portable, so if mobility is a selling feature for you, I think you'll definitely want to check this one out. Even if you want to play this one outside on a windy day, I don't think it'd be difficult at all. It doesn't have any cards that are going to blow around, and I think it'd be pretty easy to hold the pages down. So this is definitely one of the more travel-friendly games that I think you'll ever come by. And if you think this one's worth checking out, you can find links to the campaign in the description below. And launching on October 5th, we have Patriot, and this plays 1 to 6 players and takes about 90 to 180 minutes to play. And this one looks like a really interesting semi-cooperative social deduction game. And in this game, the president has been given 5 threats from an assassin, each with a date and a demand. And if that demand is not met by that date, well, then bad things are going to happen and potentially get that president murdered. One player is going to be playing as the president, which can be randomly chosen. Then there's going to be a few different president cards that all play a little bit differently that you're going to be able to choose from. And then all the remaining players will be able to draft a asymmetrical character card with its own special ability. But then they'll also be assigned a alliance card, which is going to give them an allegiance to the president or to the assassin. And if your goal is to try and kill the president, there's 2 ways that you can do that. You can either elect for a vote, where players will be spending their influence to try and tip the vote either one way or the other, or you can try and kill the president by inciting civil unrest. Causing enough civil unrest can create riots that can cause a lot of difficulty for the other players and can also cause more riots to occur. And all of these things can raise the threat level track, which if it reaches the end, well, the king being a live problem will solve itself. But the way that this game works is that players will be taking turns performing actions, and there are a whole bunch of different actions that you can take in this game, and there's a whole bunch of resources that you can gain as well. And you can spend those actions to gain those different resources. There's the influence cards, which you'll be using to influence different decisions or votes. You can gain money, which goes into a shared pool for all players to make use of, or you can gain science tokens, which is more of a personal benefit because they go straight to you, and then you can spend those later with another action to gain science cards, which gain you special abilities. And there's two ways that you can add money into the pool. You can just straight up spend one of your actions to get money into that pool, or you can spend one of your actions to raise the taxes, which doesn't get you money right away, but it gets you more in the following rounds. And although gaining money can be helpful to the overall cause, it also causes civil unrest. So it can be a convenient way to disguise your motives. And the interesting thing about the civil unrest and the riots that it causes is that when a riot occurs, you're actually going to be covering up one of the action spaces with a riot token, and this is going to be assigned randomly, but it basically blocks off that action space as an option until players are able to clear that space of the riot. And there's a few different ways that you can do that. You can either prevent a riot by spending an action to protect an action space, or if the riot is already there, you can spend actions to try and remove active rioters. Players can also spend an action to put out beacons, which kind of act like fluid actions that can come and go throughout the game, because you can also spend actions to get rid of those. And these action spaces behave a little bit differently because they can only be used maximum once per round. And of course, like I mentioned before, players can spend an action to call a vote to assassinate one of the players at the table. And whenever that happens, all players get to assign as many influence cards as they like into a shared pool of cards. And then all of those will be revealed, and depending on which side it lands on, a player will either be killed or spared. Whenever a player is killed, their allegiance is going to be revealed, and depending on what that is, they're either going to be reset as a new character, losing some of their resources, or they basically lose everything and then can only perform influence actions for the rest of the game. And at the end of a player's turn, they're just going to do one more thing, and that's to draw and resolve a brief card. And this is going to give that player a choice to manipulate the state of the game in a certain way, or it could also have a choice that all players can influence, and depending on the influence that players contribute to that, it can have different in-game effects. After all players have had a turn, you're going to resolve the first threat, and if it's a fail, there's going to be negative consequences to that, which usually incites civil unrest and can cause riots or just straight up increase the threat level. And in order to succeed in these, you're trying to meet the demands, which usually come in the form of the different resources of influence, money, and tokens. And that is also one of the actions you can perform on your turn, is to contribute some amount of resources into that threat card. And the game continues like this until all of those 5 threat cards are resolved and the president survived, or it ends as soon as the president is killed. And of course, depending on your allegiance throughout the game, you'll win or lose depending on that outcome. This game looks like it has a really solid design, and I really only scratched the surface trying to explain this one, so I highly recommend checking this one out if it sounds interesting to you. If you like deduction, but you also like games with some meat on them, I think this one could be really interesting to you. So if that does sound like your taste, you can check this one out. I got links in the description below, and check out the campaign to find out more. Also launching on the 5th, we have Stifling Dark, and this plays 2 to 5 players. It takes about 60 to 120 minutes to play, and this is a one versus many hidden movement horror board game where players are going to be choosing asymmetric investigators, each with their own major and minor abilities. But like I said, this is a one versus many game, so there's going to be one player playing as the enemy with their own special abilities, but then each enemy also has a set of attack cards and special ability cards, and you're going to be choosing from these cards at the start of the game which ones you want to play with, because you can only play with one attack card and a few ability cards depending on the player count. This is really neat because you could even play the same character and have a very different game depending on those cards that you choose. And all the players will be playing on a location board. And there's going to be a few different locations in the game, and these can have some different themes, buildings, and features, as well as different points of interest for the players to interact with. And everyone's going to be sort of playing on the same board, except for the enemy that's going to have a smaller version of that board hidden behind their player's shield. And the reason for that is because this board is shrouded in darkness, and there's going to be some different points of interest and items that the players can't see but will be visible on the enemy's board. And also the enemy will be using that board to keep track of where their character is, because all this information is hidden from the other players. But the way that this game works is that each round there's going to be an event card drawn, and these are going to get increasingly more difficult throughout the game, and these are going to cause trouble for the players. Then the players are going to be taking turns performing their movement action depending on the movement that their character has. Then they can spend stamina for additional movement, or to interact with different POIs, or to use items that they might have in their possession. Players can also use their flashlight to light up areas of the board at the cost of their batteries. But this can be really useful because this will help you discover those hidden items out on the board, or to help you find where the enemy is hidden. And when players do this, they're going to be using a special component that represents the light of the flashlight. The enemy player is going to have to look at their smaller board and then let the players know if anything that they can't see is now lit up. And if the player happened to flash the light onto the enemy, then that enemy player is going to be taking their character token and then putting it from their small board onto the main board. And this is going to allow all the players to see where that enemy is. And they're going to stay there until they're able to get away and hide back into the darkness. But after all the players have had their turn, the enemy's going to get a turn and they'll be able to move around on their personal board or the main board, depending on where they are. And if they are on that smaller board, they can also interact with different things out on the map. But this can also create noise, and they'll have to leave noise tokens as they move around on the board, which kind of leaves a trail to the other players of where that enemy has been. But of course, they can also use their attack and ability cards to try and deal damage to those players. Of course, all of this does leave a bit of a trail behind you, so you'll want to be strategic when you do take these actions. If the players are able to complete their objective before any of them get killed, then they win the game, but if any of them are killed, then the enemy wins the game. And if this one sounds interesting to you, I have links in the description below. And those are all the campaigns I have for you this week, but don't leave yet because we have a couple awesome giveaways to announce. And this first one is really exciting because this one's going to be for an all-in pledge. So I really want to thank the team over at Mighty Boards for putting together such an awesome pledge for us, but also I want to thank them for putting together such an awesome game. This one's going to be for Fateforge Chronicles of Kaan, and this is a game that's getting a lot of attention and a lot of positive reviews. This one actually has a seal of approval from the Dice Tower, which they don't give out very often. And this one also looks like a game that I would personally find a lot of fun. This is a game that uses dice for your action selection, so you're going to be rolling dice, and you can decide to use those for different actions, or you can use them to activate your specific abilities and skills. This is a cooperative dungeon crawler type game, except this one has a large focus on the action. So you're going to be thrown into all sorts of fights, but the game starts rather innocuous with players just trying to go to the city and free their emissary from a prison. But as players go out on this mission, things are going to spiral out of control, and you're going to be thrown into all sorts of situations where you're going to be forced to fight. And players are going to have to make all sorts of decisions as the narrative escalates, and the decisions that the players make, and whether those decisions were successes or failures, will ripple into the future of the campaign, because all of this will be tracked within an app. And that just makes it really easy for the players to just live with their decisions, because the app's going to remember what you did and what happened, and it's going to provide the narrative and the story moving forward. And even though this one is a large game offering a lot of story and gameplay, this is one that's going to be really easy to jump into. The sessions are all designed to play within an hour or less, so if you want a longer game, you can always just play multiple sessions. And this game's going to have some beautiful artwork, colorful dice, and of course some really nice miniatures. And this will also come with a free encyclopedia of the Fateforge RPG, so that players can immerse themselves in the lore of the world, because this is a pre-established and well-loved role-playing game that has now been adapted to a board game. And like I said, this one's going to be for the all-in pledge, which is the Emperor's Pledge. And this is going to come with the deluxe version of the game, the deluxe version of the expansion, as well as the boss miniature set, and of course that free PDF. And to enter this giveaway, just leave a comment down below with the hashtag Fateforge, and let us know of a time either in a RPG that you played or in a previous board game that just ended up in a really funny outcome. For myself, one of the first times I ever played an RPG, we were going up against the final boss, and one of my friends in the party was able to transform into different shapes. And when the boss filled the room with smoke, he decided to transform into the figure of the boss. I guess he was trying to confuse the boss's minions or something. But then of course I happened to bump into him in the smoke, and in proper role-playing fashion, even though I knew it was my friend in real life, I didn't know that as I was role-playing, so I had to punch him in the face. But we did reconcile this confusion and eventually defeat the boss, and nothing brings a team together better than a little aggression. Really excited for whoever wins this pledge, so good luck in the giveaway. And the next giveaway we have is for the Talking Hearts Couples Edition, and this comes with the Talking Hearts core game as well as the After Dark expansion. And this is more of a light-hearted leisure style game where the box is full of different cards, each categorized into a few different categories, and then they're all going to have a thought-inspiring question. And players are going to be taking turns choosing cards for one another in the categories that the player decides, and then the player is just going to have to answer the question. And all these questions are going to be designed to help you get to know that other player just a little bit more. So this works great if you're just getting to know each other by presenting some funny questions and situations for players to discuss. And if you already have known each other for a long time, this will be a great conversation starter. And like I said, this is more of a leisure style game, so there's not really a winner or loser here. It's just a fun activity to do, maybe over a glass of wine, just enjoying each other's company. And this is going to be for the Spicy After Dark expansion pack, and this comes with the core game and the After Dark expansion. And under this giveaway, I'm going to do something a little bit different here. This one's going to be run over on the Discord, so you can find a link to that in the description below, and all you have to do is head over to the giveaways channel and click the little emoji underneath the giveaway, and that'll get automatically drawn at the end of the week. And I do have a couple other giveaways still running from last week, so if you check out this video quick enough, there might still be some time to jump into those. And I did happen to post these ones a little bit later than I meant to after I posted the video, so if you checked last week when I said there was giveaways and they weren't there yet, I'm sorry about that, but they're added now, and I did put them up for an extra day, so you still have a bit of time to jump into those if they weren't there when you originally saw the video. And the two giveaways we had on the Discord last week was for USC Reach as well as Cult of Cathulhu. But we did have one giveaway that we ran over here on YouTube, and we can go ahead and draw the comments for that one now. And this one was for Age of Comics: The Golden Years. This one's doing incredible on Kickstarter, so I'm super excited for whoever wins this pledge. And to draw a winner, I just use this application here, and all these extra names are bonus entries for my Patreon subscribers. If you like this sort of content and want to help make all these efforts just a little bit more sustainable for me, you can check out my Patreon in the description below. I truly appreciate it. And for those of you that have already joined, I just can't say it enough. Thank you so much. It really does make a difference. Let's go ahead and see who won the pledge for Age of Comics. And the winner is William Liverson, and this is one of our Patreon subscribers, so congratulations, William. I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a pledge for Age of Comics. And that's all for this week. September has been quite a lot of games, and it looks like October is not slowing down at all. Definitely go ahead and check out Board Game Co's channel. I think he goes over like 40 games in the month of October that we know about right now, and there's just going to be more added, so it's going to be a crazy month. But yeah, it's going to be a ton of fun, and I'm sure there's going to be a ton of great games as well, so make sure to stay tuned, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. As always, thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.
Wow.